All right, I think we're ready to start. We still some people joining us, but we have a lot of great content today, so we're gonna get started. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you are. I'd like to welcome you to the fourth Kasten by Veeam Cube series webinar for this year. I'm Tom Layden. I'm VP of Marketing here at Kasten, and I will be your host today. I'm super excited to have Vinny Choinsky from ESG with us. He's a senior analyst there, and also Matt LeBlanc, who is a senior systems engineer here at Kasten by Veeam. In today's webinar, Vinny will be covering the findings of an ESG validation research paper that he helped to create after a deep analysis by the ESG team of Kasten K10's cloud native data management platform. Matt was kind enough to join us to share some more details about Kasten K10 and to answer any questions about container native data management and best practices to protect Kubernetes data. Before I hand it over to Vinny and Matt, I would like to go through a few practicalities for you all. Everyone except myself, Vinny and Matt will be muted, but we still want this webinar to be very interactive. So whenever you have questions, please put them in the Q&A box. There is also a chat window, but we really prefer the Q&A box because it's easier for us to check which questions have been answered. Your questions will either be answered live during the session in the Q&A box or live at the end of the session. We will provide 10-15 minutes for Vinny and Matt to address some of your questions live. We're also going to post a few polling questions during the webinar, and those questions really help us to tailor these webinars to your needs, making sure that we provide the right content in future webinars. And it would really be great if you could all take some time to answer the polling questions. And then finally, to thank you all for the time you put into attending this webinars. Everybody will get a copy of the paper, and there is one lucky person who will win a $200 gift card in a live raffle. That raffle is at the end of the session, and we will at that point randomly select a winner from the live attendees. So to win the gift card, you actually have to be on the webinar until the end. A recording of the webinar, the slides, the paper will all be made available for on-demand viewing later on. So you will get an email in your inbox right after this with all the links of what you can find where. So without further ado, Vinny and Matt, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. As Tom said, I'm Vinny Choinsky. I'm a senior analyst at ESG. We're a division of TechTarget, and we have a practice called validation, where you're going to see some of the information that is in this report from a paper we did, plus ESG research that I cover now as a data protection analyst. I cover data management, data protection, data governance. I've been with ESG for about 12 or 13 years, and in the IT space for about 30. With that, I'll let Matt introduce himself.
And my name is Matt LeBlanc. I am the systems engineer for Kasten by Veeam. I happen to cover the Northeast and Canada, and my background includes 20 years in data protection, storage, and the last 2 to 3 years specifically on data protection for Kubernetes.
Great. So what's the agenda look like? As I said, most of the layout is based off of a paper we did with the Kasten team. We're going to set that up with ESG research, data protection trends, and general IT research from ESG for each section. I broke it out into 3 sections. The paper was relatively in a 3-section format: data protection and why it's critical to data center modernization, what the distributed cloud data management plays these days with containers, cyber, and we're going to close with a cyber resiliency piece of the webinar for the 3 chapters. And again, we'll summarize some of the ESG findings as we go along, and each section is set up with ESG research. We'll close with a Q&A, and as Tom said, at the end, there will be a raffle for a gift card. So with that said, this is a theme that we keep seeing a lot lately. Data protection is critical to data center modernization. This slide here is really interesting to me because I cover the data protection space. And, we see data protection, the importance of it is obviously pretty easy to understand in general, but we don't always see improving backup and recovery at the top of the list when we're doing our research. So when we asked participants in the survey, where are you going to make the most significant investment for data center modernization over the next 12 to 18 months, data protection moved to the top. This comes from an Anchor ESG report that we've been doing almost as long as the company's been around. And, occasionally you see data protection there, but oftentimes it's security related or, helping to manage the cost of the data center, which would be at the top. So I think, we're seeing data protection in general back at the top because of all the stuff we see about ransomware in the news these days. Obviously, and we're going to, here's the first of the first pop-up survey. We hope you will participate in this as we go along, and I'll continue with my presentation, and we'll see how we do with results as we go through the webinar. The next thing we wanted to do with this, obviously, data protection covers a lot. Every business critical app needs data protection, but this is focused on containers. So one of the things we wanted to do with the ESG research was, understand what workloads you're starting to see in container environments. I think this is pretty interesting. You're starting to see, the applications we're seeing databases at the top. Just about any typical workload you'd see in a business is now potentially a candidate for being deployed in containers. And, we've been doing container research at ESG for about 3 years. And initially when we started, most of the container environments are pretty simplistic with ephemeral containers. There wasn't a lot of production applications going along. That's not the case these days. So things have changed, and the challenges and the complexity of dealing with data protection has gotten a little more complex, or a lot more complex. One second here. We wanted to also understand, what features from, if you're going to be protecting or backing up your container environment were important. And obviously, and not surprising to me, multi-cloud support sits at the top. I think a lot of people associate containers, with being deployed in a cloud type environment. That doesn't preclude them from being deployed on site. As a matter of fact, there's a number of vendors that will help with that kind of technology. But we're seeing container environments spread across clouds when the support for that is critical if you're going to back that up successfully. APIs are obviously important, as you can see here from the respondents to our survey. Reporting capabilities, I always like visibility, being a longtime data protection person and cutting my teeth as a data protection admin in this space. And, I always like to see a really good GUI, even though you may do some command line work. It's always nice to have a unified view when you're managing containers from my perspective. So, this is a figure from the report itself, and with the ESG validation type reports, we will start off with an ESG research slide to set up the challenges, but then we always start the technical section with kind of an overview of, what are we talking about here? And this is a figure that we created as we did the report for the K10 overview. And up at the left side, upper left, you see the Kasten UI. Then you see the components of the platform, the K10 platform, in the middle of the screen. The Kubernetes environment just below that, and then the storage and infrastructure. You can see that there's quite a bit of storage that is supported. So this is kind of the framework of the Kubernetes environment that we covered and captured in the report. We have some more details, and you'll have access to that report after the webinar. So I would say, Matt, maybe you want to elaborate on some of the key K10 features at this point.
Sure. So Kasten is, or the K10 platform is really designed to support just about any environment out there. Our focus is really predominantly around stateful applications. One thing that you had spoken about in the previous slide was how things have changed in the last couple of years for more stateful applications. Let me address that specifically. Yeah, storage became standardized. Kubernetes had a new storage driver called Container Storage Interface, or CSI drivers, which is applicable to just about any storage out there, whether you're in the cloud or on premises. So Kasten is able to provide support for just about any version of Kubernetes uh, within any cloud or on-prem, and supporting just about any storage out there. Now, what you see in the upper left-hand corner is a very good example of our ability to support heterogeneous multi-cluster environments. So if you want to be able to support your Kubernetes environment on-prem as well as in one of your hyperscalers, that can easily be done, and that's a very good example of our multi-cluster dashboard. So you can be able to observe everything that's going on. When we do our backups, we do back up all the components that you see in that middle image. And essentially, we back up all the components for each of your applications, predominantly by namespace, allowing us to capture everything that's needed to redeploy that application either back to where it was or someone else. And from a support standpoint, being the most mature product in the market by a matter of 2 to 3x more than any other players in this market, we can support just about any infrastructure out there.
That makes a lot of sense. I think, there's a lot of diverse infrastructures, so I think supporting that is a critical piece. You know, the next section, we kind of talk about distributed cloud data management. And, it's not surprising to me that distributed cloud comes up in this type of, when we're talking about containers. And again, to start it off, another ESG research slide. This is something we like to track, and we've been tracking it for about 4 years now. And, there's a lot of digital transformation initiatives that you hear about in IT in general, and it's designed to make things easier and better for users of technology and customers. But it doesn't always translate to IT. So I think we track this from again, this is from the Anchor IT Spending Intention Report, and you'll see that 3/4 of IT believe the complexity of their environments have gone up over the last year, 2 years. So what are some of the challenges that we're seeing with containers? And now we have our second Instapoll, and hoping that everybody participates in this. The more data we get, the more we can compare and contrast it to some of the stuff we're talking about in the report. So thank you for any participation in the polling. So what are some of the biggest challenges related to backup and disaster recovery for containers? And I think the top 3 things here paint a pretty interesting story or tell the story, right? People want to, if you had, you're currently deploying your containers, hybrid cloud presents a challenge. Multiple public clouds can present a challenge, right? Because your environment starts to be distributed. But I think, and this is always important, it's nice to have a good copy of your data, but I think application consistency and integrity are pretty critical to a successful recovery of a container environment. So, ephemeral containers that were just code, probably easier to redeploy in some cases than to try to recover them. But as you start to have persistent storage and things like that, things get more complex. So as you're putting business critical applications into container environments, application consistency, like with any other part of your infrastructure, become more and more critical. So, sorry, the Instapoll throws me off a little bit with the clicks. It's not, this slide kind of tells it all in the title. Multi-cloud support is becoming critical to container environments. In fact, if you talk about whether it's important to backup and recovery or very important, 90%, 45, add up to the 90%. 90% of our respondents said that this is a critical component. So being able to support your containers in a multi-cloud environment is something that we're tracking and seems to be a key component. So, this next slide comes back to the report. And I think, some of the things that I like is that, this kind of gives you an at-a-glance metrics of your environment. I think that containers, much like VMs, if you've been in the space long enough, have the potential to sprawl if you're not managing correctly. It's nice to know what applications you have in your cluster, that you see here with the K10 UI, and the policies that you're backing them up with. Obviously, this is a test environment, and what kind of storage am I using to back up my environment? This kind of at a glance lets you see if you're missing anything, how your policy are being used, how your storage is being consumed, and kind of at the bottom you have some activity with the environment. So, Matt, maybe you can tell us a little bit about how K10 customers are leveraging some of the metrics that we're seeing here from the ESG report.
Sure. So as you can see here, we do have the Kasten K10 dashboard up on the screen here. We have 3 tiles for easy management. In the left-hand tile, you see the application tile. That's where Kasten will automatically discover all of your applications. Essentially, it is by namespace. Now, for each of those applications, it will be determined of one of 3 reports. Either it will be compliant, non-compliant, or unmanaged, as you can see in those 3 color-coded bars there on the left. Now, an application will be considered to be compliant if it has a backup policy that is actively running, scheduled and running. It would be considered to be non-compliant if that backup has not been run yet, or it has failed for whatever reason. And then finally, it is unmanaged if it just has no backup for it at all. Now, the policy management in the middle allows you to go in and manage those policies that you've created, either backup policies or import policies. Import policies you would use if you had multiple clusters and you wanted to do, and there was a question in the chat there asking about migrations, and you could use Kasten to migrate not only from homogeneous Kubernetes flavors, but you could also move to a different flavor of Kubernetes. So we can use the import policy to pull our backup from our export, pull it into that new cluster, and then restore into that new environment. And then finally, usage and reporting over on the right. This has been a pretty critical component, especially when we're talking to our customers. We're finding there's really 2 sets of shareholders that we really like to address. IT operations, which is a big fan of having the easy to use interface, graphical interface, allowing you to have simple reporting. But everything that you see in the dashboard, we can also get that information or run all commands via native APIs. So running native kubectl commands, or kubectl if you prefer, or OC commands in the case of OpenShift. And you could even download those reports, allowing you to have a tangible PDF that you'd be able to share with management.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Oftentimes you see this trend where you have, in Kubernetes, you had a lot of developers engaged in the container piece at the beginning, and you're starting to see, with business stuff, you have to kind of transition that into IT operations, and the UI can, in my opinion, can help make that a little easier for the operations team. But it sounds like you're providing hooks for development as well, so that you can create kind of a shared responsibilities model here. Yet be able to get the support for data protection and let the Kubernetes developers work on things that are important to containers, like the code of the application. It makes a lot of sense. So in this picture, this comes from the middle of the report, where we talk about some of the features and capabilities, or some of the process for backing it up. And as a data protection administrator, whether it was backing up Oracle database on-prem or file servers, NAS devices, I like to have the granular control over how I manage the data. So in this figure, you see some policy information. We got a high level policy capture on the left side, but then you get into kind of the ability to create your backup jobs, the backup frequency, and you can see some of the granular capabilities, daily, weekly, monthly here on the upper right side. And then I captured, or we captured the screenshot down the bottom because we wanted to understand how you can manage the retention. So, Matt, another area you might be able to drill in and let,
Sure.
us know how the capabilities
Sure.
match up to the challenges.
Yeah, there are basically two parts to our backup. Now we do rely on snapshots in order to capture the backups of each application, but I just want to make it clear: snapshots are not a backup unless we have a copy somewhere else, and that's what we do. So not only do we take a snapshot, but we also export out to Object Store or NFS. And any S3 compatible storage is fine. Now, what you see in the screen here is essentially a summary of what we configured. So we're going to configure our backup with we're going to identify what application we're going to capture. In this case, it is labeled mCoursi Pacman, one of our colleagues here. Then we're going to set our schedule, how often you're going to take that backup or snapshot, and how long you're going to retain it. Now, the second part of our backup will be export. So we're going to export out snapshot and the metadata out to our object store or NFS. So we have a schedule, how often we're going to do that, how long we're going to retain it, and as well as how long we're going to retain it for. So it is pretty easy to set up, and you have a lot of control, as you would expect from any other enterprise level data protection platform.
Great. And I think that, again, we're in the middle and the beefy part of the validation report that we did. So, here's where we did a distributed cloud backup and recovery. And, I think, on the upper left-hand side, we see, again, our policy. And then we look at the backup. We're looking at the kind of the job sequence in the middle of the screen. We got the backup, the export, and the restore. And then on the bottom right side, you see that we have a successful restore. And, Matt, I don't know if you were part of the actual report or creation of the report, but I believe we did a backup in one cloud and recovered it to a totally different cloud. I don't maybe.
Oh yes, so I'm very familiar. That is actually part of our lab. I use that on a regular basis. So in the example, I believe Mr. mCoursi that you see here is his Pacman backup. He was able to back up in the primary cluster, which happened to be Red Hat OpenShift within Azure, and we're able to back up that Pacman application. It went up to a object store, and then we're able to import that data into our second cluster, which happened to be an EKS, Amazon's cluster service, Elastic Kubernetes service, should I say. And so we were able to back up from the OpenShift environment. It went up to our object store, and then we're able to import that data into our second cluster, which happened to be in EKS, and then we're able to restore Pacman. Now, the interesting part here is that these are different flavors of Kubernetes. So there are some differences in many of the variables, and we can change those as we redeploy your application. Now, the way we do our backups is that we take a snapshot of your PVC, but we also back up the metadata. And by that, I mean everything that was used for the deployment and configuration of that application, including the Helm chart or operator hub information. And that is what allows us to pull that information in. We will redeploy the application into that new cluster, and then, we'll redeploy the application, configure it exactly as it was in its original location, and we will recover the PVC from that original cluster. The other part that is really critical here is that we can do what we've referred to as a transformation, and that allows us to change various variables such as IP address, routing, and storage, just to name a few. There's actually a lot of variables that we can change. And that is what allows us to migrate a Kubernetes application, in this case, from OpenShift to EKS. But I want to make it clear, it really doesn't matter which flavors you're moving from because we do support them all as well as the transformations or migrations of them.
So yeah, that explains some pretty good multi-cloud support with the platform. So, as we started the report and we talked about data protection coming back to the top in our ESG research, and I pointed out to the fact that, I think we're seeing that back at the top because of all the cyber threats and ransomware things we're seeing in the IT news lately. So start the section with cyber resiliency and data protection. We'll talk about some of the trends that we're seeing from our ESG research and then kind of again walk through some of the things that we saw in the validation. So, this is from Cyber in the C-Suite and Boardroom report that we've done. And, we wanted to understand what cyber professionals, cybersecurity professionals and executives are starting seeing or at least feeling. And, as you can see here, 82% when we surveyed folks that are just dealing with this day in and day out, 80% believe the cyber risk has gone up in the past 2 years. So, we've been tracking kind of the frequency of ransomware attacks, and I think this is probably in its third, at least second, maybe third iteration. And you'll see that, for the folks that we interviewed, the majority of them, I think 63%, said that they've been hit with a ransomware attack over the last 12 months. I think more concerning to me is that almost 9% of the folks responded that they were seeing ransomware attacks on a daily basis, 12% on a weekly basis. So there's a number of people that having reoccurring attacks, and we're finding that when the bad actors find a soft target, they'll return to that. So it's important to have cyber resiliency and cyber security type features built into your data protection schema, right? It's obviously a combination of front end security, but once you get hit, you kind of turn to the backup and your DR capabilities to recover from a cyber attack. So immutable backup is one of the key pieces to protecting against ransomware type recoverability, right? If you don't have a good copy, you can't recover your data, right? It's part of the NIST framework. Obviously, there's air gapping and analytics that play a big piece of this. But starting off with a good copy is a really critical to a successful restore. So with this is captured from our testing too. So we wanted to see how that was how easy it was to set that up within inside the K10 framework. As we were doing the report, on the left side, we see, AWS S3 storage settings that we walk through, then, configuring that with inside K10, and then actually using that to do a restore. So, Matt, what are you seeing from your customer base? Are they using the immutability capabilities that you have? What are the trends that you're seeing? And maybe anything you want to elaborate on this setup or ease of it?
Sure.
Would be great.
It has been I think nearly a year since we had come out with support for immutable backups and basically making sure that you have a unchangeable copy or gold copy of your backups. It's quite simple to set up. It's really just a matter of you'll need to set up your S3 or Azure Blob storage for the immutable copies, and then you'll be able to create a new location profile within Kasten, allowing you to, and this is basically the answer of where do you want to send your backups. You're going to send them to your S3 compatible storage with immutable copies. It's pretty easy to set up, and you really only takes about probably 2 minutes to set up.
Great. So, we talked about complexity for IT, but when digital transformation is still maturing, and we're still seeing a lot of organizations with digital transformation initiatives front and center. And as they mature, one of the biggest outcomes people are driving towards is operational efficiency, as you can see here. from the top respondents, right? Becoming more operational efficient is key to that. So as we drilled into kind of the capabilities as we're doing our part of the validation report and walking through key features, I think, visibility is key to improving operational efficiency. And in this chart, we're just dropping into the report section. I think, it's hard to recover whether it's ransomware, whether it's DR, whether it's just corrupt data or somebody deleted something if you don't have good backup copies, right? So I thought this report was pretty interesting, and I highlighted a few pieces in the red call-out boxes where you have the compliance, right? So on the left side, you see the actions, things that are happening for each one of the backup windows that we captured, right? December 20th at this point when we did the report, and then whether or not you're falling into the compliance that you described, and then stored utilization trends. I think that visibility, if you're not compliant with what you want to your SLAs, then you're not going to recover, right? And if I think the storage piece, being able to see this at a glance is important, because if you see drastic changes, you'll know that something may be wrong with your backup. Maybe you can dive in a little bit deeper here.
And there is another piece that I don't see on the screen. It may have just been cut off. Is that we also allow for the export of each one of those reports. So as you can see on the screen, December 20th through December 21st, 2021, there's an updated feature, I think, that came with a later version, and you can now download a PDF of those. So not only are you able to get reporting on each of your clusters, but you can also have something that you can take away and share with your management team, assuring that you do have compliance across all of your clusters.
Great. So as digging a little deeper into that, I think we pull this out because it's usage and utilization, data utilization. So I know in this particular figure, we're kind of just tracking data as it grows, and the snapshots that are being used, and the object storage. But having this at a glance and allowing the administrator to kind of look in and see this on a regular basis, you kind of get an idea of what's happening in your environment. So you're kind of used to seeing normal trends. I would say that, for anomalies or things like that happen from a ransomware or any kind of malware attack, you'd be able to, you would see a spike in this. So we put this in the report just to kind of let folks know what kind of visibility they have into kind of utilization and object and snapshot trends. Do you see, customers using this for what I'm describing, Matt, or do you have another take on some of the stuff that you can get out of the trending data that I may have missed?
Well, the other thing that you can also do here, and I know we have a very simple screenshot of the management interface, is we also have the ability to filter on that data. So even though it is showing that we have, say, 19.6 meg of object storage, you can actually dive in and see the consumption from a snapshot as well as object storage perspective for each one of your applications. And you'd be able to see trends of that consumption. Now, another component that is also, you'll see we dedupe and compress that exported object storage, or NFS, and we give you some reporting data on that. And I do want to make it clear, the dedupe ratio that is listed on there, this is coming from a lab. That is a bit exaggerated, but we do typically see somewhere between 30 to 70%, but it is always going to be dependent on your application consumption, change rate, and how often you take those backups. So a lot of great reporting information for you to make sure you have command and control over your ecosystems.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I appreciate the a little deeper dive and a description of some of the other capabilities and how you can drill into that. So, we're coming closer to the end of the ESG section of the webinar, where we're covering stuff that's in the report. And we always close with a kind of our summary. We call it the bigger truth. And I think, what's important here is that, Kubernetes is very helpful, especially in the application development place for digital transformation for a lot of companies, right? But protecting applications and business data in Kubernetes environment is, is challenging, especially when you move from simple containers to more business critical applications. So, organizations need really a complete data protection solution. And, I've been doing this for years. Very happy, Matt, to see all the capabilities and granular frequency and retention capabilities that I saw as we were walking through the report, or the validation technical review. And, we found that it was very feature rich. K10 was a feature rich application. It was pretty easy to use. The UI, APIs, things like that, they take the guesswork out of protecting the Kubernetes environment. So, I think if you're looking to expand, improve, or do something new in your container environment, I think you really should have Kubernetes on your short list of evaluation products. It basically summarizes up the findings from our report. Obviously, there's a lot more detail to the report, and as you mentioned, Matt, a lot more detail in a demo of the UI itself that folks can get involved in. With that, I think the next slide may be something that Tom or Matt, you will take up here to let people know what the QR codes and things will bring you to.
Sure, awesome. And thank you so much, Vinny. This was a really good webinar. Thank you, Matt, as well. So the QR codes you have there are bringing you to the free Kasten Kubernetes learning platform. So we've got a full-on labs, so hands-on labs-based learning platform for Kubernetes, where you can, I think we currently have 8 labs available, ranging from setting up your first Kubernetes cluster to building your first Kubernetes application, to deploying storage for your application, running backups and recovering data that may have been lost. So a lot of very learningful labs, and all of that is free. So I would encourage everybody who is still in the kind of learning phase on Kubernetes to definitely go there and take a few labs. It's really learningful and fun. It's a great community. And then also the other QR code is to the free version of Kasten K10. If you have applications running in a sandbox or in production and you want to give Kasten K10 a try, see how it works, what it does for you, you can use it for free. I believe it's 5 nodes forever for free. So please go ahead and sign up there. With that, I think we're ready to go into the Q&A session because we got a lot of very good questions, and I would recommend folks to keep posting questions. I've made a selection already of some of the more interesting questions that we have been getting, and I will keep an eye here on the Q&A box. Oh, and there is another, I think the last poll question, so let's take some time for that. Let's take a couple of seconds and then I will hit the first question.
One of the common questions I saw was, do I need Veeam installed in my environment in order to deploy Kasten? And let me address that directly. Kasten is a cloud native application. So there are no dependencies on having Veeam already installed in your environment. And so we are installed as a operator via Helm chart or operator hub within each of your clusters. And if you have multiple clusters you want to manage together, then we can basically connect them so you do have that multi-clustered dashboard support.
All right. And instead of going to my list, I just randomly saw a question in the chat window from Alberto, who is asking whether we support backup of database data like MongoDB or MariaDB. Matt, you want to take that one?
Absolutely. Actually, backing up databases is probably one of our primary use cases. And those that were mentioned, MariaDB, MongoDB, Cassandra, MySQL, PostgreSQL, just to name a few. If it is a cloud native application that you would find a description on CNCF's website, then we would be able to support it. Now, the important piece in backing up any database is make sure you have a recoverable copy. And one of the other components we have is was asking about getting consistency. And we have three different ways that we can get consistent copies for any of your applications, including your databases. First of all, we can get a crash consistent copy just by integrating with your CSI snapshots. If you have an application that has a lot of data that is in resident memory, we can quiesce that or flush that information out by doing a temporary freeze of that data service. We'll take the snapshot and let it thaw out. Application goes back to normal. If you have a database such as Mongo, Postgres, etc., then we can make a call to that logical data service as well. So this is very similar to if you've ever backed up Oracle. Oracle is not usually backed up by, it's backed up usually by RMAN. And RMAN is called by the backup application. And the same thing applies here. If you were backing up PostgreSQL, for example, we would make a call to PG dump to do a logical dump of that database, making sure that we have a good, clean, quiesced copy, and it is most importantly, recoverable.
That makes a lot of sense. I think it aligns pretty well with the challenges chart that we put up when we did the research of our respondents, and the third one down for being in the RFP, or what the feature that you want was application consistency. And I think that holds true for just about any kind of business critical app. So whether it's on containers, I think, or whether it's bare metal or whether it's a VM, people want to make sure they don't just have a backup of the data, but they can recover the application or the database to a known good state. So that makes a lot of sense, Matt.
All right. And Matt, since you were talking snapshots, there were a few snapshot related questions, one coming from Pablo, whether we were talking about consistent distributed snapshots. And then someone anonymous was asking what the overall snapshot retention length of time is that we are supporting. Can you dig into snapshots a little bit more?
Yes, I'm not sure if you're looking for the limit of how long we can hold on a snapshot for. Within the configuration, it does say years. I don't know the exact number, so my apologies, but it is really designed to be, you can set your retention policy for whatever the business needs are. As for how many years we support, I would have to get back to you on that. What was the other question that you had, Tom?
Whether the snapshots we're referring to are consistent distributed snapshots.
Our snapshots are consistent, and as I had mentioned earlier, we have a few different ways to get consistency, but just using your CSI drivers, we would be able to get a crash consistent copy of that application.
All right, and then still related to the database question, there was a follow-up question. Someone was asking for support for DB2.
I'll have to look into that. I believe we do, but I need to double check to confirm.
Okay, and next I want to get into a topic that you've been answering, but I want to discuss it more publicly here about stateful versus stateless applications. Before we go there, though, very simple question. Someone is asking what the difference is between Kasten and Veeam. Veeam is actually the parent company of Kasten. Veeam has built a magnificent business helping companies and businesses with their backups of VM-based infrastructures. They've been going for more than 10 years. Magnificent product line, and the folks who founded and run Veeam, they saw the vision of Kasten coming up with a solution for Kubernetes backup, just like they back in the days built a solution for VM backup. And Veeam a year and a half ago acquired Kasten. So Kasten is actually an independent business unit within Veeam. And then the second question there, Teddy, the difference between K8 and Kubernetes. K8 is just a popular abbreviation of Kubernetes. They're exactly the same thing. So with that, I want to shift to the questions around stateless applications. So I believe one user was asking what the added value is for Kasten K10 when a company or an organization is running stateless applications. Matt, you want to dig into that topic a little bit?
Sure, I believe I actually already answered it in the chat, but essentially, I do talk to a lot of customers, and and oftentimes they believe that most of their applications are stateless. The better question I have is, are you sure? The reason I say that is because CSI drivers were introduced 2 years ago. We've seen a proliferation of stateful applications, all the databases that I have mentioned today. And if you have a database, it does need to be protected. Now, in the case of if you are 100% stateless, there is still a use case for covering that, and that we would be able to. I was actually speaking to a university, and in their case, their developers are actually students, and they're there for 3 years apparently after their freshman year, and they'll start playing around with their lab environment. And the concern that they had was if someone accidentally deleted their repo, so we can also back that up as well. So the value is not quite as great for stateful applications, but my question is, why have you not leaned into stateful applications? Is it because there wasn't data protection available? Were you not aware that there were storage options available through the modernized CSI drivers? I guess that would be my question back to you.
Yeah, I might follow up with that on the when we were talking about the taxonomy of applications too. You know, when we looked at the ESG research, databases was the number one selected application. So I think that kind of adds another data point to that research, right? You were seeing a lot of questions around databases, which I think is good. It tells me that our research is on target, and but even with most companies will have a number of different applications, right? They might have a database, they might have some stateless applications, and somewhere in between, you said, "Are you sure they're not stateless, Matt?" That was a good question. But I think having that visibility of understanding how many applications are running on your cluster that you can get right from the K10 UI, and then see whether it's compliant or not. I think you can have container sprawl just as easily as you could have VM sprawl. So these types of pieces, this visibility, as you start to move and you want to manage the life cycle of a container when it moves from development into production, do I have the right policies, right? So I think those are important. Perhaps even if they're stateless, right? If they're still part of the business, and you want to make sure you're backing them up with according to your business SLAs, this allows you to do that. It allows you the visibility, and it allows you to create policies that you might apply to, well, and the application is in development, and then automatically move it to with tags to another policy when it moves to production. Does that make sense, Matt?
Yes. Sorry, I missed the mute button there. Any other questions, Tom?
Yeah, a bunch of them, honestly. I think it was Andreas who was asking, can we use Kasten to back up pods and namespaces in a Kubernetes cluster and restore it to another Kubernetes cluster in a different geographical location?
Absolutely. So the way we do our backups is what I had mentioned earlier. We back up the data and the metadata. And by that, I mean the data is like the PVC. So you have your database, Mongo, for example, and they'll be using that persistent volume claim, the disk. That's where your data resides. We also back up the metadata. So that includes the pods, secrets, config maps, and everything that was used for the deployment of that application. Now, if you wanted to use Kasten, K10's data management platform, to migrate, you could do that. And you would basically back up locally. We're going to take the snapshot. We're going to export up to our S3 or NFS storage. And then we're going to pull that data down to cluster number 2, which could be a different cluster somewhere else, anywhere else, as long as cluster 2 has access to that S3 storage. And when you do your recovery of that application, which came from your other cluster in another availability zone or another region, you will be able to do a transformation and essentially be able to redeploy that application into that second cluster. Pretty powerful set of tools.
All right. Was there anything you wanted to add, Vinny, or that was just?
No, that I think that covered some of the stuff Matt talked about in the middle of the presentation when we he talked about using it even for migration, right?
Yeah. All right, so then I think it's time for a couple of storage questions. There have been a few, and I think Matt, you should be able to kind of combine them probably. One question was about whether CSI supports Ceph and Gluster storage APIs. And then we were even getting questions about whether we support tape storage. I couldn't think of a use case there, but I'm pretty sure someone has a use case for that. So can you share us a little bit on supported storage, Matt or Vinny?
Nope.
Muted. We support just about any storage out there as long as there is a CSI driver available for it, and the snapshots are enabled for that CSI driver. Then we can support it. So if you take a look at our documentation, it is pretty clear that what we do support, including Ceph. So go to docs.kasten.io, and you should be able to search for any of the vendors' storage support that you require.
Good. And related to storage still, do we support, or does Kasten support native AWS and Azure immutability?
Yes.
And that's too fast. A couple of questions with respect to deploying Kasten. So one person, Jorge, actually is asking whether we're installed on-premise or whether we have a SaaS offering.
We do not.
Okay.
This is installed in each of your clusters as an operator via Helm chart or Operator Hub.
All right, so it's on premise, and then someone else was asking or inquiring about the minimal resources that are required to deploy Kasten.
They are all that information is available from docs.kasten.io. I'm going to pull it up right now. I believe if you do a quick search for resources, the amount of virtual CPU and RAM is available there. Now, what is interesting to note is that we actually use very, very little resources. We are a cloud native app, so we do scale up as necessary, but just as importantly, we also scale back, trying to save you resources, that are precious resources that you are using in your environment. Now, I am going to grab, let's see, just doing a quick search. I will put the resource requirements in the chat in just a moment.
And then let's test your multitasking, Matt, while you do that.
Okay.
I have one more question, and if anyone has other questions, please post them now, because otherwise we're going to wrap it up after this one. Gary was asking whether we are agnostic with most or all Kubernetes deployment tools and providers, distributions as well, I guess.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I just got the link that you're asking for resources. I just put it in the generic chat to everyone, so you can go check out the amount of vCPU, memory, and storage requirements for your clustered environment, which is going to be dependent on how many you have, if they're linked, etc. Sorry, I was talking and multitasking. Can you repeat the question, Tom?
Whether we were agnostic with Kubernetes deployment tools and providers, and
yes, we are. As a cloud native application, we support any version of Kubernetes. So that also includes the gamut. So I'm going to name a few, but it's not all inclusive list off the top of my head. We'll say vanilla upstream Kubernetes, right? The most generic version of Kubernetes out there. Rancher, OpenShift, AKS, EKS, GKE, Minikube, S3. I'm running short. Basically, the answer is we support them all. If they are truly Kubernetes, then we are able to support them. And I don't want to exclude anyone. Like there's Carbon out there. There are many flavors out there. We do support them.
Okay, good. And thank you for that. And I just got another question that I really want to address here, because I feel like it goes to the core of Kasten K10. And the question is, data stores, whether relational or non-relational, are usually stateful and hosted separately from the primary web-facing applications or middleware. Does Kasten mitigate problems associated with these decoupling with the installation of agents, separate pods, or through Kubernetes control plane?
Oh, well, we would never use an agent. That would not be a cloud native application. But we are able to support just about any applications that have stateful data within your cluster.
All right, so thank you for that. I don't think we've got other remaining questions that we, oh, I just saw